Okay, so here's my speech for you non-Discord participants. I encourage you, if you own a rooster slash canister, large whipped cream making thing that is used realistically predominantly to suck nitrous out of it instead of actually make whipped cream. If you have one, yes, that thing. If you have one, do me a favor, unscrew the top and take a peek inside. And even better, grab your, this is like a real-time experiment. Grab a paper towel and wipe it out and see if there's any oily residue on the inside of it. I would be surprised if there weren't. However, on some, there's quite a bit more than others. In fact, I'll be right back. Oh no, actually I threw it away. But a lot of people will use their canister for like, oh my God, I swear, I don't know how to get all my notifications to go away. But a lot of people will use their canisters for like 100, 200 rounds of whippets. Only after that point will they open it up and be like, oh, that's disgusting. I just wiped out some black, gray, green shit from the inside of it. And the degree to which this happens is different based on how many rounds of nitrous you've done, and like the quality of the chargers that you've used, whatever. And sometimes it's just like a little kind of pasty film and there are some black speckles, and sometimes it's like disgusting. So do yourself a favor. Let me change my name real quick. Sorry, I'm checking this chat. Yeah, food grade is not medical grade. They're not the same thing. However, realistically speaking, the lubricants that are used to load nitrous into those chargers, like it is going into food in general, so the likelihood of it being crazy toxic, I don't think is particularly high. However, if you're going through nitrous frequently or you're doing it in like large quantities, then that's a pretty sizable buildup. Like you're not supposed to eat that much of whatever that lubricant is. And I have wiped out a couple of roosters where I've found black specks of metal. And yes, indeed, you can inhale those black specks of metal. So make sure you check the inside of the unscrewable top as well to see if there's anything gunked up in there. And there's a great reference on Arrowid. If you Google Arrowid nitrous filter, there's an article that was written where they did tests on different whippet brands and different kinds of filters to see which would effectively block that. And it turns out that using like 3 layers of single layer cotton filtering that you just kind of wrap around the outside of the nozzle and secure with a rubber band should really drastically reduce the amount of lubricant that gets into your mouth and into your lungs. So
what kind of filtering?
It's just like any standard cotton filter. You could use a t-shirt even, like 3 layers of it. I think that you can probably find finer cotton filters at a hardware store or something, but just like pop it over and rubber band it around. Yeah, sometimes you can get through a shitload of chargers without cleaning it, and sometimes you open it and there's like nothing in there, and that's cool. Oh, wow, that is disgusting. Yeah, check that out. Can you hold that up one more time?
Yeah, I just took like a Q-tip to the interior and it is super filthy on the interior of the cap.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm talking about. So be mindful of that and use a cotton filter where possible. And I just don't know the long-term effects of inhaling that kind of gunk, but it's better to probably not risk that, I would say, because it's very easy to avoid. So grab like an extra t-shirt or something, cut a couple of squares of it, layer them on top of each other, wrap it around the nozzle with a rubber band, and you can use it the same exact way as you would otherwise. Like there's no difference to my knowledge in the performance of the canister. So just wanted to share that with you guys after doing a particularly gross swab this weekend. And hopefully none of you get gross metal particles. That was difficult to say, in your lungs. And now for the actual reason that we're here. So let's finish off. I guess that is the actual reason that we're here, is that kind of stuff. Let's finish off by previously on DrugsCo, we finished talking about amphetamine specifically, and we're still in the amphetamine type stimulant class. So we were talking about meth and looking at the firsthand account of CG Kid, who is a YouTuber who details his own experiences under the influence of and withdrawing from, in some cases, various substances. And today we're going to kind of like finish up on meth and then go into the cocaine sphere. And there's, again, some stuff that I'm going to have to say out loud that isn't actually visually represented in the lecture. Like I said, staying up to date takes quite a lot of time. So looking at meth, just to catch us up real quick, we talked about amphetamine lasts 4 to 6 hours approximately, instant release, and then there's also extended release. There are two sides of the molecule, levoamphetamine and dextroamphetamine. Amphetamine in the form of Adderall is usually a 3-to-1 ratio of dextro and levo, which means that it's going to have kind of that, I don't actually need to rehash that, but what I'm getting at is that amphetamine, shorter lasting than methamphetamine, by quite a bit actually. And that's part of where we see methamphetamine's effects take a slightly different turn than amphetamines, is that the longer that the activity of an amphetamine type stimulant has to kind of like exert its effects in the brain, the more interaction it can have that could have the potential to become neurotoxic. So this is, oh my God, I have do not disturb turned on and all of my tabs are closed. And where do these noises come from? I swear to God, every single time. So the thing about meth that I really want to drill home is that the deaths affiliated with amphetamine type stimulants, generally speaking, are from a specific set of things. In this case, it will be from excessive brain activity, which can lead to seizures, because seizures are a product of irregular brain activity. It's kind of like electricity shooting at wrong time, the cadence goes off and things go a bit haywire for a minute. But then also overheating. Your core body temperature can raise to just like extraordinary heights, especially if you're in a hot environment, which can lead to its whole slew of own consequences, including increased oxidative stress, including increased neurotoxicity. But this hyperthermic aspect of things is actually really important to keep in mind for all stimulants, particularly amphetamine type stimulants, including MDMA. Sorry, the chat real quick. Should probably use a light colored piece of cotton so you can see when it gets dirty, correct? Yeah, I would definitely recommend that if you can. But if you're in a pinch, honestly, like if you have nothing around, then at least get the people that you're with to like put their t-shirt over it or something. Like anything is better than nothing, you know? So in terms of like actual deaths that come from stimulants, what we're looking at most of the time is a cardiovascular or a neurological overload, basically. And this can happen in a whole bunch of different settings. You know, like if someone eats 150 milligrams of Adderall, then they could very easily have a seizure that could lead to coma, or an arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat that could lead to heart failure. Like these things can happen, generally speaking, from the stimulant class. Now, looking at meth, most of the reason that methamphetamine is differentiated from the like regular amphetamine and Adderall is because of its duration of action and because of its route of administration. And I know I started touching on this last time, but I really cannot drill this point home enough. We have amphetamine and methamphetamine, which are two distinct drugs. You know, it's not the same as the comparison I'm about to make, that have largely the same pharmacology. Like there are some minor differences here and there, but they generally speaking have the same pharmacology and the same subjective effects. Where they really start differing is how you do them, how you ingest them. And that's similar to cocaine versus crack, right? The way that you ingest a substance will drastically influence the way that it acts on your body. So in the case of Coke versus crack, which we'll get to in a little bit, right, it's basically the same exact substance. It's just a difference in how you ingest it. So when we look at the propensity for physical or psychological dependence on something like meth, what we're really looking at here is the intensity of the experience, and whether the intensity of the experience is going to influence the way that the experience interacts with your psyche and with your body. And that's part of why methamphetamine is considered to be so much more addictive, is not necessarily because there's anything particularly special about the chemical, but because of the route of administration being so intense and creating such a compulsive redosing culture. And interestingly, there's actually a huge culture around smoking meth on like Tumblr. That's a massive thing, is like girls who smoke meth. And there's just like videos, like thousands of videos all over Tumblr of like people smoking meth and like talking about the crackbacks that they get. And we'll get around to what a crackback is in a second. And it's very much like a social endeavor, you know, like there is very much like a central pillar of the meth community that is the substance, but it's very much like a lifestyle oriented thing because of how repetitive the ingestion process is when you're smoking. And rest assured that if you could smoke amphetamine in the same way, which you can, it's just very uncommon, I would say, comparatively, there would be the same culture around it too. It's just about like the act. Now, in terms of actual physiological damage, again, this is largely dependent on how much you do and how you do it, and also about your own relationship with drugs. Like if you're a person in the past who has been super fiendy with cocaine, then you probably will be super fiendy with meth. Like that's just kind of an expected outcome. If you're someone that's been super fiendy with gambling, you might be super fiendy with meth. You might be super fiendy with amphetamine. Like you could be super fiendy with caffeine, realistically speaking, although it's a bit different. But the neurotoxicity that we're looking at here, again, is like, it's largely dependent on the consistency of your use, and the propensity for creating that effect is going to depend largely on how much you do and how concentrated it is. Like that's just the case with most substances. It just happens to be that the way you do this one is possibly more likely to increase the concentration of it because it's being reinforced. That's what I'm getting at. And then looking at the cardiovascular effects of doing any stimulant, you know, like same with amphetamine. If you're doing a recreational dose of Adderall that's like in the common range, then you're far less likely to experience outside of the common range. If you do a ton of Adderall, you could have muscle breakdown. Like I think it's rhabdomyolysis is the word, I believe. Ooh, I could be wrong about that. And the same thing can happen with meth. You know, it's like very dose dependent for all of these substances. But there's a really, really interesting article that you should all read. It's linked in the presenter notes for this slide that details exactly how all of the reporting on meth is biased as fuck, because it all goes in and intentionally pulls negatives from the literature, and it's extremely biased. Like it's flat out biased and very negative on purpose, and often makes these like genuinely baseless claims. So you should really read this article because it's a super interesting kind of like wool pulling on how searching up scientific articles about like meth neurotoxicity, for instance, often just kind of jump to flagrant conclusions because people hate meth. That's just like culturally how it goes. How does this apply to ER versus IR ADHD medications? The concentration, I believe, of like amphetamine in particular, like methylphenidate's kind of a different animal that I won't talk about. Methylphenidate's more comparable to like cocaine in terms of its subjective effects. But generally speaking, the therapeutic doses of amphetamines are thought to be extremely well tolerated and are not linked to neurotoxicity at this point in time. At sufficient doses, amphetamine type stimulants are neurotoxic. Like that's just kind of how the class is. But I would say that like the thing about extended release versus instant release is that it's still I don't want to speak too confidently on that one actually. So you can email me and I'll look further into it. Am I correct to assume that because people think meth is better because it has less physical side effects? Was not sure about that one, and a longer duration and better ROAs. I don't know if people think meth is better per se. I'm hard pressed to think of anyone that's like meth is good, but that's probably largely because of the stigma associated with it. Like on a blind test, there have been several interesting studies that have shown that people were given like a proportional dose of amphetamine and methamphetamine because they're dosed approximately the same orally, and people often prefer amphetamine. And also couldn't really distinguish between the two of them, except that meth lasts longer. So I don't think I would say it was a better ROA. It's just like if you smoke it, it'll hit you harder. And people work to make their drugs into something smokable, like cocaine, making it into crack. Like you do that on purpose to make it hit you harder. Let's watch meth get made in real time. Now, this is a practice called shake and bake, and shake and bake is among several methods of making methamphetamine, but this one is particularly insidious because of the amount of danger involved. If you do shake and bake wrong, you blow up your work environment and yourself. In fact, there are millions of dollars worth of hospitalizations in many states across the country every year for meth-related burns and injuries. So I figure what better way to display this than to actually have you watch someone make meth in real time.
My name's Jeff the Chef. We're gonna manufacture methamphetamine.
Shake and bake is a simple method of producing meth.
Nat Geo, am I right?
Pills. It's got a flavor in it.
The key ingredient to make meth.
Yeah, there's a Confederate flag in the background. Clearly, this person is bad. I'm just gonna say that. But yeah, this is just a demo on how to make meth. And the problem with, yeah, Nat Geo, I mean, this is Drugs Inc. Drugs Inc. slapped when I was like 15. I was eating this stuff up and I was like, oh wow, it's so unbiased. And now I do not feel that way. But it was actually better than you might expect bias-wise from Nat Geo, surprisingly enough. Yeah, so let's just get this out of the way. Confederate flag, bad. This person probably not very good. You're not necessarily bad because you make or do meth, but this guy, fuck this guy.
Meth is pseudoephedrine, found in over-the-counter cold remedies.
It's not much money sinking into manufacturing meth. When you sell a gram, there's $100. Spend $50 to go buy 2 boxes. Cook again, that's over $650 in your pocket.
The other ingredients are easily available in household stores.
Liquid fuel, I like the red bottles. It's a lot more potent. Lithium batteries and 100% law.
Local meth cooks are feeding an insatiable demand for the drug.
In this town, shake and bake became popular within the last 3 to 5 years. People started teaching younger generations how to do the shake and bake with household items.
Shake and bake is fueling a meth epidemic.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Users turn into amateur cooks. Pseudoephedrine converts to meth by a toxic chemical reaction.
Basically, if I'm going to do it, I want it to be as strong as possible. So you never cut the positive side of the battery. It will explode. You hold that piece right there, it brings out your lithium. If you're training, definitely don't peel the battery outside. No, this is the most dangerous part, where you add the water.
Producing meth outside a lab is very dangerous, and cooks often find themselves in an explosive fireball of corrosive chemicals.
And that's where people mess up. They think, okay, I can go a little bit longer with the pressure. No, you can't squeeze that bottle anymore. You need to release the pressure as fast as you can. See all the bubbles? If you don't burp it, it will explode. You will have a hell of a fire.
A chemical reaction in the bottle creates a buildup of deadly ammonia gas.
See right now, the bottle's pretty tight.
During the cook, Jeff is paranoid about getting busted by the cops.
Burnt the fuel, the only time you'll be able to see it is when you're smoking it off. It'll actually drop. It'll look like Christmas.
The final step is to smoke the bottle, which separates the meth from the liquid.
Merry Christmas.
The gas produced is poisonous hydrogen chloride.
Breathe the smoke in your face. All that white is your methamphetamine.
Jeff then filters and dries it.
That's how you make meth. So everyone knows. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than just like that. It's not like that's the entire process right there. Holy shit. All of my apps are closed. I don't understand how this is possible. I'm sorry. I'm just baffled. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that you can extract it from Fedra. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it correctly. No, it's not this chat. It's Facebook Messenger. I just don't know where it's open. I'll find it if it keeps getting annoying. But now, real quick, Also, this is graphic. This involves like you see people getting poked with needles and abscesses and stuff. So like be aware that that's what's about to be on your screen. But a really important thing to talk about when we talk about meth is why people hate it so much, because we just saw the pharmacology of it is basically the same as amphetamine. Like they're different drugs, they have different risk profiles, but they are not nearly as different as people think that they are.
Recent years. It wasn't until relatively recently, periods in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, that it started to find its way into the recreational drug use scene and the party scene, but also I think perhaps more significantly, a drug that was problematically used by economically marginalized groups. Because it's very cheap, because it was very accessible.
I would venture to say most of the people, a lot of them use because of their situation. Or they're using, got them in the situation, but they stay using even though it's going to keep them here because they don't have to deal with it. You know, it lightens it for you.
We're society dropout. The society is still functioning, but we're not in it. We're on the outside of it.
It's probably this association with poverty that has led to the popular emphasis on meth as some sort of particularly evil demon drug. But here's the thing. Despite the cliches that bits of the media and some government agencies like to trot out, there's actually nothing in methamphetamine itself that makes it dramatically more dangerous than other stimulants. To address one particular myth, meth does not make your teeth fall out.
It's not the fact that you're taking methamphetamine that makes your teeth fall out, or makes you, your skin go sallow, or makes you look like some of those photos where they do these awful before and after images. This is what meth will do to you. What you're seeing there is someone who has a dependence problem and is neglecting their health more broadly. Lots of people are prescribed methamphetamine or other amphetamines and use them every day, and their teeth don't fall out and they don't look like those awful faces of meth photos.
Basically, what we treat
There you go.
is all the occupational hazard that comes from being an injection drug user, whether it's heroin or whether it's methamphetamine. See the black stuff that's in there?
That's poison.
It comes from the cutter that they cut it with, and that it just never dissolves in the body. So this is picking up the work of the cartel, plus not having quality control. And this is charity. This shouldn't be charity. This should be public health. What a health emergency, and they're not addressing that. They should be ashamed of themselves.
Perhaps we could say that it's not just that America has a meth problem, but more that America has both a prohibition problem and a capitalism problem.
It's a great series.
Recent years.
It wasn't.
Whoops. Get out of here. Wow, looks like I didn't update the animations on here. That's fine. So possibly one of the most common adulterants of meth, honestly, is just amphetamine. Or no, actually, I take that back. I would say that one of the more common adulterants of amphetamine is methamphetamine, because meth is a lot cheaper and easier to produce. On rare occasion, you might get Molly by accident, but that's really, really unlikely. Like that's just kind of in there for fun because it's an amphetamine type stimulant. We're getting to ISO in a second. There are also a lot of inert fillers that go into it. But then there's also methylsulfonylmethane, which is otherwise known as MSM. And this is kind of just like a supplement that's used for a lot of weird off-label reasons like arthritis and bone health and whatever, but it looks a lot like methamphetamine. You can cut MSM in at the end of the crystallization process and make it a part of the crystal. And it's very difficult to tell apart MSM from meth, except for if people are, like generally speaking, if someone is a really experienced regular user of a substance, you get a feel for what different things do and do not look and feel like. It doesn't make you good at IDing them necessarily, but it does give you a one-up in like knowing about whether or not something is consistent with your own past experience. So don't mistake like trusting the user knowing a lot about what they're doing with the user being advanced lab testing technology. Like there is a difference and they both have their place. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence about MSM and its different effects. And then there's ISO or N-ISO. And N-ISO is a kind of a different animal. This is a more common cutting agent that has been everywhere in the supply. MSM and N-ISO are like really, really, really common right now in illicit meth markets. And this is another one that is like, generally people look for these big shards of meth. And they really actively seek it out because they think that this big crystal means safety, but that's not how the market works anymore. Just because something is in crystal form doesn't necessarily mean that it's pure or uncut or even high quality. So in the case of N-ISO, for instance, you can rock it, as in cook it, into these big fatty crystals that people will just like drool over because they assume they're huge crystals of meth. But the fact is that making huge crystals of meth is not that easy. If you have a massive rock of meth, that is like kind of sus, honestly. So a lot of people report that ISO or NISO, whatever you want to call it, actually produces pretty severe hangover symptoms, almost like alcohol-ish, and is just generally uncomfortable and can take a long time to kick in and is a different experience overall. I know a former meth user who describes the high as a roll. Is that accurate? Is a roll like Molly would cause or just more up? Yeah, so meth is definitely far less of a serotonin releasing agent and more of a norepinephrine releasing agent. So that is a pretty major differentiator between them, because that serotonin activity is less like uppy and stimmy. Like you feel awake, your tiredness will vanish, but that does not guarantee that you're like up and going. And meth is very much like you're up and going, often for many, many, many hours. So like there are some empathogenic and entactogenic effects of methamphetamine, but they're not quite the same as rolling. And they're frequently described as feeling a lot more forced. I've definitely met quite a few ravers who were absolutely rolling on methamphetamine who thought that they were rolling on Molly. So like it's definitely possible, but I would agree that it is more self-centered as opposed to Molly's outwardness. Like Molly makes you inherently curious about who other people are and why they are the way they are. Meth just makes it really good feeling to discover those things, I would say, generally is the distinction that I would make. But it can be. Now here's a picture of a crackback. A crackback is basically the process of, this is a pizzo that we talked about before. This is a meth pipe. It can be used for crack as well. But generally the procedure of doing a crackback is that you put your crystal into the bowl piece of this pipe, and then you heat it from below with a flame. Usually start with a lighter so you don't torch it too hard, because if you torch it too hard, you can burn the liquid. And the idea is to roll the pipe back and forth. You don't want to roll it too far, otherwise it'll tip over and all the stuff will come out of the hole in the top. But it's like a 130 to 1030 kind of roll. And when the actual crystal liquefies, then you'll see it start to vaporize, right? It will create smoke. And the idea is that the first time you hit a new batch, you allow that vapor to cool off because it's supposedly burning off some degree of impurity. And I believe that that actually is an effective way of like a first line of defense of burning off impurity in the case of methamphetamine. I don't know the extent, to be honest, but you'll usually see like a U shape on the inside of the pipe from where when you stop heating it, it will crystallize like this. And interestingly, the pattern of crackback, the pattern of crystallization that you see can tell you a lot of information about how cut your substance is. But this should not be a replacement for testing, obviously. This is just a more effective means of kind of like sussing out specific impurities like NISO, for instance. Now, the idea behind this is to kind of like purify it between each go, avoid burning it, and also get some information about what could be in your batch. So just to give you an example of what different kinds of cuts might look like in practice, here we have on the left MSM, which is methyl sulfonomethane, that's that supplement, side by side with meth. And I don't even know which is which. I have no idea which is which. And that just really goes to show you how the rock of both of these is extremely similar looking. And that's part of what fools people so effectively, is that the idea behind these cutting agents, right? Like MSM is more of a bulking agent than anything because it's not as psychoactive. The idea behind it is to fool people into using their sensory information to believing that the quality of their substance is what they think it is. And people get really fucking cocky about knowing the tips and tricks and ins and outs. Like, oh, it will crack back in this like beautiful dragonfly pattern, or like an ISO will crack in this weird fractal pattern, and it will be kind of like wet if you push down on it in the middle. And to an extent, those things might be effective, but we could very easily see new cutting agents introduced in the next couple of weeks or months or years that emulate those effects and are completely different things. So it is definitely like an interesting thing to know about, is this concept of crackbacks, especially if you, for instance, walk past a pipe on the ground at any point in time and for whatever reason have nitrile gloves in your backpack and you pick it up and inspect it, which is something that I would do, but you might not. And then you might be able to see the actual residue on the bottom and see if like Oh, this person was burning it. They were holding the flame too close. Oh, this wasn't in a U shape, or it was like all over near the top of it. It could have been dropped. Like, it's kind of cool. It's like art history, I would say. So MSM is often added near the end, so it crystallizes with the actual meth crystal. So there are certain ways of like heating it and washing it that will release the MSM from the structure. I don't know exactly which ones will do that though. And then here you have NISO on the left. So you can see you can see the difference in the crackback structure, right? Like this one is very kind of like splashed out and uniform and from a center point. And this one is a little bit more kind of like weird and all over the place and tacky. Now here's the question, right? Is like crystal meth is schedule 2, while crack is schedule 1. Now my question for all of you is why that's the case. And some of you might have an easy one-word answer for this, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. Like it is a complicated question, right? I see script, I see race. Yeah. These are basically where I'm getting at is like the racist history of crack and also that meth is used in pharmacology and in pharmaceutical practice. But like I've said before, you really literally are criminalizing a route of administration with crack. You're criminalizing smoking. You're not criminalizing cocaine. And that's what the real difference is. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. We're going to do a whole segment on all of that and open that can of worms in great detail later. Don't worry. Now let's look at coke. A standard dose of coke is approximately the same as a standard bump of ketamine, which can be a real problem at parties when one is either misrepresented intentionally or accidentally reached into in the wrong baggie to do a line of what you thought was coke, but is actually ketamine. And then the geometry of your surroundings get a little bit confusing, I would say. I refer to ket as indica coke. Wow, I don't, but I respect that for you. Presumably this is a dose of pure coke. Pure and coke are two words that are kind of an oxymoron. They just don't really go together, as we'll see. I think that this dosing scale is like the reason that it's such a broad scale is that it gives room for impurities. If you have really, really shitty coke, then you're going to need like 100 milligrams of it to feel anything. If you have really good quality coke, you might only need like 15. The likelihood of you having high enough quality coke to only need 15 milligram bump is pretty low because there's no really good quality coke like anywhere. If you know someone that has coke that's that high quality, then you're in like the 0.02% of people that use coke. Otherwise known as so many different things. Yay and yayo, I think, are predominantly West Coast terminology for it. But it's also known as blow. I mean, that's like the most colloquial one. And then there's white and coke are also really colloquial. Snow is less colloquial, and then there's crack, which refers to the different form of it, which is an onomatopoeia. It's called crack because when you heat it, it makes that snap, crackle, pop sound like Rice Krispies for your brain. Then it's also known as being coked out or cracked out, depending. There's much more terminology. Gacked sometimes is like a generalized stimulant term, but I would say largely that's for methamphetamine, and also some more terms for meth are gear and crank, which is kind of like fun mechanical. Yeah, hitting the slopes is a thing as well with these guys. That's very much like late high school texting so mom doesn't find out, like, yo, boys want to hit the slopes in the hot tub and snort some amphetamine cut with cattle dewormer. And everyone's like, yeah, I'll bring the PBR. Yeah, geeked and geeking, totally. Yeah, there's nose beers. That's kind of funny. Wow, highest purity you've seen tested in a lab. At best I've seen is 92% unadulterated tested by, wow. I don't know. I don't get access to purity test results, honestly. That's not something that I have access to because drugs data cannot legally release them. However, I do know people that have brought back actual coca leaves from the Andes and refined them. And that's like, what else are you going to do? So generally speaking, you have powder form is definitely the most common by far and away. Then you have crack, which is the rock form, and then coca leaves. You can also find paste, coca paste, but it's like far less common. And you can chew the leaves or you can make them into a tea as well. That's more of a practice that's native to South America. Fish scale is just another term for the general appearance of the coke. And fish scale is a big problem actually, because it gives the impression that you can, again, ID this substance based on its appearance, which is patently false because you can cut in things like levamisole and levamisole will make that fish scale appearance. So people often look to buy their Coke depending on how shiny and flaky it looks like fish scales, or they hold up a rock of it and they're like, oh, look how scaly it is. It's so pearly and beautiful. And it's like, that could very easily just be an antiparasitic cattle dewormer, which we'll see in a second. Like, that's part of the reason that it's cut in, is because it replicates that effect. So fish scale is just a term for pretending basically that you are more confident about the quality of your Coke than you are. But again, that's like a similar thing with like looking at MSM versus methamphetamine. You can look at a rock of each of them and they'll look the same, and you're not stupid. It's just how the drug market is set up. That's it. I'm not a cow, you see. That doesn't sound good. Well, I think that actually this treatment works in humans as well. So you might be in luck. We'll see. Coke is an extremely short lasting substance. We're talking like 15 to 45 minutes max. And if you're super lucky, you might be able to eke out another 15 minutes or so and get an hour out of your Coke bump. But this is part of the reason that it is so fucking reinforcing, is that usually that duration is like, I would say smoking gives it, like any substance, gives closer to that duration because it's so like short and intense. But in the case of Coke, snorting it is like just crazy short. And for this reason, people often find themselves doing a bump of Coke and being satiated for like 3 minutes and then doing another bump of Coke. Leva is an acetone soluble. Last I checked from my research, that was why the cartel fell in love with it. Got to use a few different solvents to get all the shit out. Yeah, that's a major issue as well. A lot of the major adulterants of cocaine in particular can't be washed out with acetone, including amphetamine, which is like the biggest adulterant, I would say, because amphetamine so closely emulates the effects of cocaine for people that aren't like complete professionals at doing coke. And it wouldn't be hilarious if we had like a Coca cup of like who can do the most cocaine. Maybe that's not funny, but just thinking about the future. So when we're looking at the duration of Coke, if you make it into crack, which is obviously a smokable form, it also just like doesn't last very long. It lasts even shorter. It's 5 to 15 minutes for smoking crack. That's like nothing. And again, you can see how much more reinforcing that would be if the high is so intense and so short. Like the compulsion to redose gets really, really strong really, really quickly. So you see this kind of like this differentiation between smoking and snorting across all substances that are predominantly smoked or snorted. In the brain, cocaine works a little bit differently than amphetamine type stimulants. The three main neurotransmitters that it acts on are still dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. But in opposition to something like amphetamine or methamphetamine, cocaine isn't really a releasing agent. It's a reuptake inhibitor at these areas. It's an SNDRI, a serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine reuptake inhibitor, which means that it inhibits the reuptake of all three of these. And this is predominantly taking place at dopamine and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, but the serotonergic effects of cocaine are significant, right? Like more significant, I would say, than amphetamine type stimulants, if I'm remembering correctly. And this is part of what gives cocaine this like reputation for being such a highly sociable substance. Let's take a look at this in action, right? Okay, so without cocaine, we have our dopamine, we have our reuptake transporter pumps. Now, without Coke, normally dopamine gets released, it binds, it gets sucked back in and repackaged, and that's the whole shazam, right? Now, instead, if we add cocaine to the picture in T-minus like 3 seconds, there it is, there's cocaine. These little Coke molecules jam themselves in the transporters, which we've envisioned in the past as being vacuums, and instead of dopamine being able to go back in and get repackaged, there's just a ton of it floating around in the synapse so it can do its thing more and more. This is how reuptake inhibition works, right? It increases the bang for your buck of existing neurotransmitters in the synapse. Now, just a brief history of cocaine. Coca has been grown all over. We're going to talk all over South America, particularly in Bolivia and Colombia. I would say predominantly Colombia. Colombia is like the major area that coca has been grown. But there are other countries that grow it as well because the climate is excellent for it. And it's been being grown there forever and being used as like a classic stimulant, just like casually in communities forever. So of course the Spaniards arrived and they were like, cool, all of this, we'll take it. And also you guys using this leaf stuff is freaky and we're scared of what we don't know and are colonial dickheads. So we're going to punish you severely for your drug use in all areas, but especially with coca, and prevent you from utilizing this until we discover that it's actually really profitable and we kind of like it a lot. And then we're going to make it into coca wine. So colonialism happens, people are fucked for their indigenous drug use, and then it turns out to be profitable, and all of a sudden they're like, we could export this and enjoy it for ourselves. Fast forward hundreds of years to the cannabis industry and the psychedelic industry, and you might get a feeling for why I and so many others are really frustrated about what's happening right now with legalization. The pattern continues. So there's coca wine, and then there's Coca-Cola. And in Coca-Cola, I actually need to brush up on what I remember about the history of Coca-Cola, but it had actual coca in it. Like, this was a stimulant. There's a reason it's called Coca-Cola. And it wasn't until, I believe, in the 20s maybe, that the FDA was being formed. I forget the exact timeline of this. And they were like, guys, you have to stop putting Coke in your drinks. Like, we just can't keep doing this. And Coca-Cola was like, okay, for sure. And then they just like didn't. They just kept putting it in for a while until the government was like, yo, like, you have to stop putting cocaine in this drink. And they were like, oh, okay, for sure. And that's when they stopped, which I think is super funny. And then there was Sigmund Freud, who loved cocaine. Like, he was a major proponent of cocaine. Now we're going to come back. Oh, the Tax Act of 1914. I think that sounds like it might be right, but I'm not positive. I'll have to check that. They're the only company that can legally import coca leaves. That's fun. The Freud stories, yeah, Freud shared his coke with a lot of other academics, and some of them had really bad times and some of them had really interesting and good times, like super, super wild. Yeah, the Marijuana Tax Act, I think you're thinking of the Marijuana Tax Act of 1914, but there was also a slew of legislature during that time that started regulating these things for the first time, basically. Then the 80s rolled around, and this is a whole lot of stuff that we're going to come back to in a little bit after the spotlights, because there's so much to unpack here. Like, the culture around cocaine is wild, but we can see in the 80s when these ads started being put out, when coke started getting really, really popular. And I'll give you like we'll talk about the Contras. That's right. We'll talk about the opium trade and like how that was influenced. But this is like, these were real advertisements, right? About how to dehydrate your Coke, because if you leave Coke exposed to air, it basically like degrades in quality really quickly. You have to keep it sealed up. And then there were also like ads for golden razor blades to chop your Coke more effectively and whatever. And these jade snorting materials and straws and spoons and shit, and like things to wash out your nose with so you can do more Coke more effectively.
It's a vacuum. Oh my God, it's a vacuum snorter.
Those are on Etsy.
I am not muted. Wow, sorry guys.
That was so funny. It was like a moment of pure cute captured on camera. So sweet. I've never seen anyone get so excited about a vacuum shaped tutor. But yeah, you can definitely buy these on Etsy. They're like being sold right now in real time. But yeah, it's funny. There's like fucking ivory coke snorting stuff that was being advertised in magazines, and this was like a very common thing to see. So let's just take a quick look.
This is Emily from the bike.
Whoops. At the beginning of one of the more complex things around coke. What am I looking for? 530. The cocaine trade is a can of worms, you guys. There are few trades in the world, I would say, that are less ethical than the cocaine trade. And this is not because necessarily of the people that are participating in it, but because of the ways that systems take advantage of the cocaine trade and the amount of poverty encircling the cocaine trade. So here's a first
vivir para comprar nuestras cosas. En cambio, un raspachín pues se gana 120 mil pesos, dependiendo cómo esté el tajo.
Estamos en un laboratorio de pasta de coca, donde nos van a mostrar todo el proceso desde que llega la hoja hasta que se convierte en el líquido que es la base para la pasta, y también para saber por qué ellos eligen este camino y no otro. ¿Cuántas arrobas de hoja de coca hay aquí?
Se trabajan con 20 arrobas, porque como siempre se trabajan 3 tarros, Es una cocha de 250 kilos, para que quepan los tarros.
¿Cuántas veces la pisan y cuántas veces la pican?
3 veces. Aquí pues ya van en el segundo proceso de la picada, que es donde se le arroja el material. Aquí el material es cal, nutrimón, se le echa sal para que ella haga el proceso de fermentación, donde la hoja llega y pela y saca el alcaloide de la hoja. Luego se le hace, después de eso se la patea para revolver la hoja, para que la hoja quede uniforme con todo el material y para que la hoja vaya quedando más pequeña, porque ya pasa luego al proceso de los tarros. Esto se llena, se coloca en la orilla y se llena de combustible, ¿sabes qué es gasolina? Petróleo. Se arroja lo que es la hoja a la gasolina y saca todo el alcaloide que queda en la gasolina y llega hasta la tina allá, donde escurren esos 3 tambores. Acá el compañero llega y arroja la gasolina en ese tarro para luego echarle otro químico, donde llega y se separa la gasolina de la droga. Y la droga sale en agua. Y ahí ya pasa el proceso pues, de corte, donde le echan otros químicos y ya vuelve pasta de coca.
¿Y cuánto te pagan por el...?
El día con a 1.000 pesos, pero por un día, una jornada larga. O sea, no es como la gente piensa que es una cantidad altísima, no. Acá lo que hace es trabajar más.
¿Ustedes creen que puede ser rentable cultivar otra cosa?
Pues ahí tocaría como sentarse con la comunidad y discutir las cosas, porque digamos que eso no es una decisión pues individual, ¿no? No algo colectivo. Pues, digamos que la raspan allá, pero no hay quien la trabaje acá, entonces no hay trabajo ni para uno ni para el otro.
It's an amazing mini doc about El Naya, the trafficking route. Okay. Now just to see how this kind of necessity to turn a more expensive product into something more affordable, Paco is a really good example of this. Paco is an Argentinian version of crack, basically. And we see kind of something similar with Sisa in Greece, which we'll get to, I think, a little bit later. Oh my God, where am I going? 6 minutes. Where like the necessity to make a substance more accessible means that people will bulk it, and also that the supply is less reliable.
After visiting Villa 31, we managed to make contact with a Paco cook in another villa who agreed to show us how the drug is made as long as we concealed his location and his identity.
O sea, el Paco viene de lo que es la resaca de la cocaína. Y acá hay un par de kilitos acá. Va mezclado con unos componentes, que puede ser veneno para rata, hasta bicarbonato, todo eso. Tira un poco de coca. Un poquito de coca. Bicarbonato. Un par de gotitas de agua. Ahí se está cocinando. Esto se deja secar, que se seque un poco. Bueno, y después los pibes lo fuman en esto, que es una pipa. En esto lo fuman. Pirulana adentro. Una esponja de metal. Sí, como esta, pero color amarillo.
Vaqueros sometimes put metal cleaning fibers or ash to keep a flame going in their pipes. Now, cooking Paco does not require complex laboratories. Doses can be prepared in a basic kitchen just like this one.
No, esto se puede hacer todo acá en una olla, tirar los componentes un poco también, ya para preparar estas dosis, que son de 50. Ya para armar y para vender.
And you could see how tiny of a quantity of cocaine residue was in there, right? Like that was just residue. It's a very, very small quantity. This is, again, a great little mini doc because everything that Vice puts out about drugs is somehow really good. So this was part of the European Drug Report, I think, in 2017, showing the relative purity of cocaine in Europe. And you can see that it's pretty goddamn dismal. Like the average coke purity in Europe during this time period was between 36 and 51% on average. That's really low. And in many regions of the United States, it's like 5%. It's almost zero actual cocaine in there. So again, this is an issue because there are many things that if you're using a reagent kit, for example, if you have, I'm trying to think of a good example of a non-reactive cutting agent. There are quite a few of them. I believe that MSM might be one of them. Something that does not really react with the reagents and you sprinkle a little bit of something that does react on top of them, then you'll get a reaction for cocaine, for instance, using the Lieberman test, which will turn yellow in the presence of cocaine. But you will not see a reaction for this like massive swath of bulking agent because it's not a reactive substance. So that's something that a lot of people misunderstand about how to use reagent kits, and it gives them a false sense of security. It makes them feel like they're getting something that's like, oh, like it's really good, or like I know that it's coke because it reacted like this, and that's just not how this kind of stuff works, unfortunately. Just a little bit more terminology about this. This thing, I think I mentioned this before, this concept of postnasal drip, which is basically you snort something and you inflame your mucous membranes in the process, but also whatever you snort is going to get mixed into a little goopy paste that will slide down your throat, and it tastes disgusting. Or how it tastes really depends on the substance. Like 2CB residue that you're swallowing is an extremely unpleasant experience, or swallowing MDMA, God forbid, is an extremely unpleasant experience. Ketamine is also really gross. Usually the drip is really gross until you're high and you forget that it's gross. And then there's something like cocaine, which is a numbing agent. So it actually will numb your palate as it goes down generally, and will numb your sinuses after a minute too, which is actually pretty useful for making your likelihood of like nosebleeds a little bit lower, I would imagine, because since it's a topical anesthetic, it reduces blood flow by constricting your blood vessels. And then there's the issue of fiending. And fiending can happen with a variety of substances. But again, the shorter acting it is and the more intense of the rush it is. And generally, I would say the more dopaminergic it is, although that's a bit of an umbrella statement, the higher likelihood a substance or administration is to be fiendy, which is like pushing for compulsive redosing or preoccupation, basically, like desire, it's craving. For both coke and crack, the safety profile is like largely, I would say, compared to amphetamine type stimulants, you're looking at things like seizures, heart attacks, and strokes from overamping, which we'll get to in a minute what overamping is, from cocaine and cocaine-like drugs, basically, because coke is notorious for causing cardiotoxicity and like heart problems, basically, like valve disorders and similar things like that, infections like heart infections, depending on how much and what kind of coke you're doing. The likelihood of physical dependence, like withdrawing physically from coke, I'm actually pretty sure is not like a thing that happens, except for the psychological of having like decreased energy levels and sociability and irritability, basically like the opposite of the effects that you would get from cocaine. If you're using it regularly, you could very easily experience withdrawals in that way. And then there's also the issue of addiction. And as with other substances, the dosage that you're doing, the frequency that you're doing it at, and the route of administration that you're using to administer it are all major determinants of whether or not a substance is going to be reinforcing to the point of becoming an addiction, like an actual DSM, like diagnosed addiction, right? But the thing about coke that I want to point out is that generally speaking, I would say that coke is a lot riskier than amphetamine types of stimulants, including meth, honestly. And that's partly because it is so damn underestimated. Cocaine has been washed out as a substance in terms of people understanding its risk profile since the 80s, when it became absorbed into generally white affluent communities. And this is a real problem because coke is a very popular party drug and very popularly combined with a lot of different stuff. Its purity is exceptionally low. The trade to get it is extremely bloody, but it also is a really short acting substance that can lead to compulsive redosing at a higher rate than many other substances. And there have been a lot of overdose deaths from cocaine because of its cardiotoxicity and the prevalence that it has in terms of causing arrhythmia, like dangerous arrhythmia, dangerously irregular heartbeat. So it's actually like a reported phenomenon that there are some people that can have like sudden heart failure from doing cocaine. Now, this is not to say that this should be used as a scare tactic, because you can have sudden failure of a lot of things from a lot of drugs, like sudden sniffing death from doing inhalants, like whiteout fluid is a thing. Like you can, in rare cases, like do whiteout fluid once and have just like sudden death, but that's not very common. The reason that I bring it up is because coke is underestimated. With many of these substances, I'm trying to fucking push the pendulum and destigmatize so we can even have a conversation about them. But with coke, I think that people just don't take it seriously enough, honestly, which I find really interesting. The question about coke blocks the sodium gated voltage channels that keep your heart's rhythm. That sounds right to me. I don't remember the exact mechanism of action, but I'm pretty sure that you're either on the right track or that's like specifically correct. Positive cation calcium channels are heart rhythm. Yeah, I think that it's not sodium. I think that it's calcium or potassium. One of those. So again, route of administration dependent. You can have a lot of complications from the way that you ingest something like coke or crack. You can have a deviated septum from snorting substances too frequently. I hope I don't run out of time today. There are some reports of liver damage. Like this is just one of those things where it's not as risk-free as people assume that it is. Looking at adulterants, there are things like strychnine, which is like a literal pesticide that has been found in cocaine sometimes that can cause like instant poisoning. And thankfully, this isn't that common, but like it happens sometimes because you can cut almost anything into coke. And oftentimes people just don't really give a fuck about testing their coke because they trust it inherently. There's been a lot of fentanyl in coke in the United States recently. If you are doing cocaine, you need to fentanyl strip test it. I've tested coke that is tested positive for fentanyl. The only issue there is that the fentanyl test strips can pop a false positive in the presence of amphetamine. So you should test it with a reagent kit as well, which will kind of put like an additional barrier to make sure that there isn't like that immediate overlay of amphetamine. Then there's levamisole, which is the cattle deworming, retracted cancer treatment, antiparasitic that is used to replicate that fish scale look. There's also scopolamine, which is not very commonly used because it's a deliriant. In some rare cases, there could be scopolamine adulteration in cocaine, but I would say it's definitely not that common. It's an anti-nausea medication, and it's also used in certain regions of South America for nefarious purposes. Then lidocaine, which is an extremely common cut. It's a numbing agent, it's an anesthetic, a topical numbing agent. The thing about it is that it's not supposed to be swallowed. And if you're doing coke, you're going to swallow it. And if you're swallowing lidocaine, it can cause stomach problems, which sucks. So generally speaking, I tested cocaine that went to a deep black on marquee. Oh, any idea what that could have been? Wasn't the same purple to black like you see for MDMA. It was only a small speck. If it was only a speck, then it's possible that your plate wasn't clean, or it could feasibly have been that there was like a little bit of MDMA cross-contaminating your baggie, to be honest. Like the purple to black reaction isn't always super foolproof in my experience. Like it sometimes just goes so fast to black that you can't really see the color change, especially if it's just a speck. Should you spit coke drip? The concept of spitting drip is kind of like, I generally find it to be kind of unrealistic, but I would say that like spitting drip in general is not a terrible idea, honestly. Most substances will be metabolized in your gut, but coke, I don't believe, is one of them. I think the bioavailability of coke in your gut is really low. So just like, yeah, that's my hot take. But realistically, you're not going to want to like hawk a loogie and taste that coming out of your mouth every time you do a bump. It's just not going to happen. So amphetamine, generally like therapeutic doses are well tolerated. It's usually taken orally, can be very effective for increasing and improving cognition and retention. Methamphetamine has a higher, I did not update this slide. This was a slide that I missed. This should not say what it does right now. This should not say has a high potential for addiction. This is outdated language that I should have caught. I'm so sorry. And also should not say neurotoxic. This is just like pretend that none of this exists right now. Methamphetamine is basically prolonged amphetamine that's usually smoked. Realistically, it lasts longer. Cocaine is a short-lived, energetic, is a bit fiendier oftentimes than other stimulants and can damage your nasal cavities and is generally quite expensive comparatively. And then there's crack, which is like the more profiled version of coke that is more concentrated in its power, which means that it can get you higher quicker. And is more intense, generally speaking. I'm just going to go overtime today. I'm sorry, you guys can dip if you need to, but there's only a little bit left in this, and I just want to make sure that we're done for next time. Only 4 slides to go. So 2 major sources of stigma for stimulants are skin and mouth. And I want to bust this right now. Skin problems from stimulants almost always come from vasoconstriction, which reduces blood flow to your, yeah, it's content warnings on all of these slides, you know what I mean? Vasoconstriction reduces blood flow to your skin, which can prevent your skin from repairing itself as effectively. If you're doing any stimulant continuously for a long time, then you might experience this effect where your skin just isn't able to receive blood flow to repair itself as well. But this also is often just like a hygiene issue. This is like a lifestyle issue. Any substance of any kind, any lifestyle in general of any kind where you are not engaging in regular hygiene will cause both of these problems. And I would say that that is the major root of both of these, is like some lifestyles just don't allow for hygiene. And then delusional parasitosis is one that the media loves to talk about. Like, oh, meth users feel bugs under their skin. And it's like, in some cases, people can feel like itchy parasitosis. Like, it's not a fake thing, but its prevalence is way blown out of proportion. And this is used as a very deep tool for stigmatization. And looking at meth mouth, there's a term for this, starts with an X, I forget what it is. But this is just dry mouth causing tooth decay from lack of hydration, or more likely, again, it's like a hygiene issue, a lack of ability to access toothpaste and toothbrushes or a place to brush your teeth, especially if you're a person without housing, you know? Now here, this is also very graphic and possibly very upsetting, so be aware of this. This is like an actual firsthand visual of overamping. Overamping is basically like a stimulant overdose. It's where you take too much and you experience hypertension and increased heart rate, just like way too much activity. Sorry guys, this is a little bit upsetting. This syringe contains apparently 0.2 to 0.4 grams of meth, which is a massive, massive quantity. So you can't really hear it, but he just said, fuck, it's too much. I'm overamping, I'm overamping.
What the hell?
Right, so you can kind of see it's like a different thing than what you would consider to be traditionally like an overdose. So some smoked substance health hazards from this, right, are crack lip, which is where you have too hot of a pipe and you burn your lips on it, which can crack you, like crack your lips open. And then crack and meth lung in some cases, if you are just like smoking harsh substances for a super long time. Like it's the act of smoking that will cause things like pneumonia and other lung complications, like collapsed lung in some cases, I think. And then also the pathogens from sharing pipes, like you're sharing spit, you're sharing saliva with other people, and that's going to be prone to disease. When we look at the relative safety profiles of stimulants, the thing about a lot of these is that like the route of administration, right, tends to make the relative risks really go up. Like you can see that methamphetamine and crack cocaine are considered to have a higher overall risk level than things like coke or even tobacco and amphetamine. But you'll see that amphetamine is lower on the risk scale than tobacco, but tobacco is almost on par with cocaine in terms of the risk scale. And this is really an interesting insight into how we can look at the like specific relativity of what exactly makes something a risk, right? Like if we're looking at tobacco, for instance, the economic cost and drug-related mortality are huge bricks that influence that people don't usually think about. Tobacco is a very short-term thinking kind of drug for a lot of people. I'll talk about overamping medically in a minute. I just want to get through this so people can leave if they need to. Looking at cocaine's safety profile, again, like stimulants are getting further up there in the terms of like active versus lethal dose. The more of them that you do, the higher your risk is for something like seizure or arrhythmia that can lead to heart failure. Like these things can and do happen if you overdo it. As with every substance on the entire planet, moderation is key here. Just rushing through this to get this done. So some harm reduction for stimulants is that do not share snorting devices. You can indeed contract Hep C, and this is super unlikely, but like it is feasibly possible to contract HIV because there are tiny microscopic droplets of blood that can get on your snorting device. And again, this is like not a very common thing that would happen, if at all, but like it is possible, right? Meth and MAOIs do not mix. Enhancing that serotonergic activity can cause serotonin syndrome and excessive stimulation. This is a dangerous combo. Sanitization, make sure that you clean your pipes before sharing them and using them in general. Taking vitamins before you dose and ensuring that you've slept and hydrated and taking care of basic needs makes a world of difference. Not sleeping, not drinking water, and not eating are three of the biggest contributors to problems on stimulants and overheating. If you take care of all four of those things, then you are going to fare quite a lot better. Always start small, start low, go slow. I hate that it's fucked up on my formatting. I would never do that. And we're going to talk about stimulant psychosis later and talk about like safer administration for these substances. I'm going to stop this here so that, again, people who need to leave can leave, but I'm going to stick around for a second and answer some questions in the chat. Have a great night if you're dipping out. If not, how is overamping treated medically? Generally speaking, heightened excessive levels of stimulation are often treated with benzos. That's like if you're actually in the care of a professional. At home, keeping someone cool, monitoring their blood pressure and heart rate are really important. And also just like providing a relaxing environment. Honestly, usually like overamping people just need time to cool off and come down. However, if people are exhibiting signs of like agitation and confusion, or their heart is beating really irregularly, or they have chest pain, it's time to seek medical attention right away. Linked in the presenter notes on that slide about overamping is an excellent resource from the National Harm Reduction Coalition about how specifically to respond to overamping. Have I encountered 2C? Yes, I have encountered 2C. 2C frequently comes in the form of a pink powder that contains ketamine, MDMA, and or 2CB, some mixture of those things. I don't know about you guys, but that actually sounds kind of lit. But yeah, it originated in South America, I believe. I forget. Enthusiastic response. I forget exactly where in South America, but it has definitely made its way to the US. I have indeed seen it at events. I've seen drugs data, things about it. The thing is that if you're not prepared for an experience like that and it's sold to you as 2CB, it's not 2CB. Like it's just a different drug. It's just like not informed consent is really what it comes down to. I've seen 2CB and 2C, but only in small quantities. It's never like the primary. It's usually ketamine and MDMA from what I've seen. However, there have been quite a few things that have been sold as 2C that contained just like some random mishmash. I've seen some very frightening pressed pills in bags of powder and DD on the past. Recent post on Dread about a new way to remove the dewormer with hexin. Oh, yeah. I've read about this, but not in detail. W19. I'm not familiar with W19. My dad used to frown upon drug use, including weed, up until a few years ago, but last night he suggested ayahuasca to me. That's awesome. That's cool. Yes, for parents reforming their views. I do not know anything about W19. I've never heard of it. WB19. No, W19. I've never even heard of that one before. So feel free to send me information on that one. What else am I missing? The black might have been Lieberman. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a resource that I really shouldn't be sharing, but this is kind of like, I just don't really want to encourage, I don't really want to encourage anyone to use this necessarily, because I'm going to start sharing my screen again. I don't think that this is a foolproof means of testing your drugs. However, if you're getting really desperate for leads, this is a website called results.thehup.org. and you can filter by reagents and look up kind of stranger color reactions. So if we're looking at Lieberman, we're looking at black on Lieberman. Looks like some 4-subtryptamines, some benzofurans. Yeah, tryptamine. It looks like tryptamines in general, actually. Some phenethylamines. This looks like a pretty good spread of stuff. But this might be helpful information for you to use something like this, not because it's perfect, but because it could give you leads. So again, that's the HUP. Whoa, my formatting just got all crazy. Fuck Sam. W19 might be a Canada only thing. Whoa, okay. What is W18? Absolutely no idea what any of these are. That's so interesting. Yeah.
There's just a bunch of them. They're all like, and they don't know what any of them do. There was a whole thing where they're like, oh, they're like super powerful fentanyl or whatever. And then it turned out that they weren't even opioids. They were inactive. And yeah, it's a bit of a charade here in Canada.
Wow. Well, at least you guys have good access to drug checking. There's like free services that you can send them into, right?
They're finding on the downtown east side and stuff now too. So that's pretty epic.
Jeez, man. Yeah, thanks for sharing about that. I'll check out the W's. You guys ever heard of WD-40? Any other questions before I dip out for the night? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Have I ever considered doing a podcast? My capacity right now is like, I'm barely updating the DrugsCo slides, but it would be really cool to just be able to talk for like an hour about whatever I want to about drugs. Drug Classroom podcast. Yeah, I'm familiar with the Drug Classroom. I like those guys. But yeah, maybe at some point. Which festivals am I excited for when things come back safely? Lost Lands, Burning Man, Okeechobee, Electric Forest, and Utopia, Regional Burning Man event in San Diego. There are so many. There's so many. Yeah, Psychedelics Today is cool. Oh man, I'm trying to think of what else I'm honestly, I work the festival circuit, so I'm excited for everything. I want to work EDC so desperately. I want to work Hard Summer, but I only want to work Hard Summer. Huh?
So you're hoping to do harm reduction there, or working through Dance Safe?
No, I work for Insomniac at EDC.
Do you really?
Yeah, ground control.
I've heard mixed things about the purple shirts. Is that
oh really?
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop the recording real quick. Bye YouTube, and then I'll answer.